story recapped here. Today I'm gonna explain an action, comedy, and fantasy film called Pride and Prejudice and Zombies. Spoilers ahead, watch out and take care. Mr. Darcy, a colonel, arrives at an estate within Hertfordshire County to see Mrs. Featherstone because there's been a report that someone within the home has been bitten. However, Mrs. Featherstone tells him that there hasn't been a zombie incident in a while. Still, Darcy is not convinced, so he takes out a vial of carrion flies, the insects that can detect rotten flesh. The flies buzz around the room before they land on Kingston, revealing that he's slowly turning into a zombie despite still being able to act normally. Without hesitation, Darcy breaks his glass to stab Kingston before beheading him with his blade. Afterward, Darcy asks whether there's another family member that Kingston could have infected, but Mrs. Featherstone denies it. However, one of the girls, Cassandra, doesn't want to lie, so she runs upstairs to see Annabelle, Kingston's niece, but it's already too late because Annabelle has already turned into a zombie. Although it hasn't always been like this, England is now besieged by the undead to the point that they built a wall surrounding London to keep the people safe. Because of this, Mr. Bennet made sure to raise his daughters to be trained in the art of weaponry and martial fighting. However, their mother, Mrs. Bennet, isn't too fond of that fact because she still wants their daughters to marry someone rich. She even tells them that there's an upcoming dance that will be attended by Mr. Bingley, a new resident who's already the talk of the town because of his wealth and looks. Still, Jane, their oldest, alongside her other sisters, wants to attend the dance. Out of all the Bennet daughters, Elizabeth is the only one who doesn't care for social gatherings. But since all of them are going, Elizabeth has no choice but to attend as well. So the daughters start getting ready for the dance, but still make sure to arm themselves with proper weapons in case of a zombie incident. That night, they see Bingley, who's good friends with Darcy. Right away, when Bingley sees Jane, he's immediately entranced. He wastes no time approaching Jane and asks her for 2 dances. After their first dance, Bingley tells Darcy to dance with someone too. He even suggests Elizabeth, but Darcy says she isn't beautiful enough to tempt him. Hearing this, Elizabeth takes offense and walks away, but accidentally knocks over a bottle on her way out, embarrassing herself further. Outside, Elizabeth starts crying, mad at Darcy for his words. Suddenly, she sees Mrs. Featherstone behind her and realizes that she's already a zombie, but she can still talk. But before Mrs. Featherstone could tell her something, Darcy shoots the zombie's head. Suddenly, they're under attack by zombies, so the Bennet daughters waste no time jumping into battle mode. With this, Darcy sees Elizabeth in a new light after finding her fighting prowess attractive. The next day, the Bennet daughters share their thoughts on Darcy during martial training. However, Elizabeth has already made up her mind about hating the prideful man. Later on, Jane gets a letter from Bingley inviting her for tea. Right away, Mrs. Bennet forces Jane to go to the Bingleys on horseback. When Jane says she'd prefer to ride in a carriage, her mother tells her that Bingley might let her stay the night if it rains and she's not riding coach. But on Jane's way there, she encounters a bit of zombie trouble. She even gets dismounted from her frightened horse. Even when her musket backfires, Jane manages to handle herself alone. As she gets caught in the rain, Jane sees a mother holding a child, both undead, something that disturbs her. Still, Jane makes it to the Bingleys, but she comes down with a fever after getting caught in the rain, so Elizabeth immediately comes to visit her. Elizabeth tends to Jane with a physician, so Darcy follows her into the room with his carrion flies to check if a zombie has bitten Jane, but his theory is proven incorrect. Furthermore, Elizabeth catches his flies one by one and crushes them before returning them to Darcy. At night, Elizabeth is ridiculed by Bingley's sister Caroline, insinuating that she's inferior to them because she isn't as refined nor accomplished. But Elizabeth doesn't take this to heart. Instead, she fires back at them with much poise by showcasing her intellect. The next day, the Bennet women arrive at Bingley's to pick up Jane and Elizabeth. However, Bingley still doesn't want Jane to go. This makes Darcy warn him about the risk of her being a zombie. This angers Elizabeth further, and she talks back against Darcy for being prideful and prejudiced. On the other hand, Mrs. Bennet tells Bingley to just throw a ball at his estate to lift their spirits. Despite Darcy's protests, Bingley says he'll do it. On their way home, they see that a nearby orphanage has fallen into the hands of the zombie virus, and the zombie orphans are just wandering about. At home, when Jane has finally recovered, the Bennets welcome their cousin Mr. Collins, the future heir to their estate once Mr. Bennet passes. During their meal, Collins tells them that his patroness is Lady Catherine, the greatest swordswoman in Britain. Furthermore, Collins confesses that he's interested in Jane but gets rejected because Jane already has Bingley. So as a second option, they offer Elizabeth. Afterward, the sisters go out to visit their aunt with Collins and Meryton. However, on their way there, they encounter an overturned carriage with someone inside screaming for help. But the woman is already a zombie, so the Bennetts get rid of her. Meanwhile, Collins offered zero help during the encounter. Proceeding in their journey, Elizabeth is carrying all their weaponry and is struggling, but Collins only helps her hold it properly, not carry it. Soon, they arrive in Meryton and see the new militia assigned to their town. There, Elizabeth meets Lieutenant Wickham, and they immediately vibe. They also come across Darcy and Bingley, to which Elizabeth notices that Wickham is on bad terms with Darcy. So Wickham explains that he was close to their family and was even promised an inheritance. But after the death of Darcy's father, Wickham was cast away. During Bingley's promised ball, Elizabeth wishes to speak with Wickham more, but Collins takes her away for a dance. Despite enjoying himself, Elizabeth doesn't reciprocate Collins' enthusiasm. So when someone else asks her for a dance, she immediately agrees before seeing who it is. Yet she hesitates when she realizes that it's Darcy. On the other hand, Collins is interested in talking with Darcy, who he realizes to be Lady Catherine's nephew. Not wanting to engage with Collins any further, Elizabeth and Darcy both excuse themselves in separate ways. Meanwhile, Elizabeth's mother is enthusiastic about Jane's future engagement with Bingley. However, she keeps focusing on his money, something that Darcy overhears. A moment later, Elizabeth goes to find her other family members, but she comes across Bingley instead. Together, they encounter a zombie attack, so they follow it downstairs. Right away, Bingley is incapacitated after falling down the stairs, so Elizabeth finds herself cornered as she tends to Bingley. Fortunately, Darcy comes to their rescue. The following day, Jane gets a letter from the Bingleys saying that they've moved out to go back to London, not knowing when they'll return. Furthermore, Caroline says in the letter that Bingley will start courting Darcy's sister instead. Collins comes to visit the Bennetts once more, but this time, he came to ask for Elizabeth's hand in marriage, even boldly asking Elizabeth to retire her warrior skills as part of the marital submission. Obviously, Elizabeth rejects him. Mrs. Bennet immediately scolds Elizabeth for rejecting Collins. However, Mr. Bennet respects her decision. Still, her mother thinks that she's making a poor decision. Because of their fight, Elizabeth goes into the woods alone to calm herself. There, she comes across 4 men wearing top hats before being greeted by Wickham. Suddenly, the 4 men are gone. She immediately asks him about the 4 men, but Wickham says he doesn't see anyone. Afterward, Wickham invites Elizabeth to go somewhere with him, so she agrees. Together, they set out to a church to attend a sermon. But when 2 kids turn to face Elizabeth, she realizes that they're undead. Scared, Elizabeth is about to draw her weapon, but Wickham stops her, saying it's all right. It turns out it's a place full of zombies that are still civil, able to stop their thirst for humans by consuming pigs' brains instead. Wickham believes that the war against the undead could be stopped if they could form an agreement with reasonable zombies, a viewpoint that Elizabeth supports. Back at home, one of her friends, Charlotte, comes by to tell her that she's now engaged to Collins. So, Elizabeth supports Charlotte with her decision. Furthermore, Charlotte asks Elizabeth to accompany her to meet Collins' patroness, Lady Catherine. At the extravagant estate, Elizabeth sees a painting depicting the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, where people believe that if they're seen, then the end of days is near. Immediately, Elizabeth recognizes them as the men in top hats. After their respectful greetings to Lady Catherine and her daughter Anne, Elizabeth sees that Darcy is also with them. A second later, Wickham also arrives as per Elizabeth's invitation, so he asks Lady Catherine's audience over tea. Wickham is adamant about pushing his civilized zombie propaganda and asks to fund his plans, but Lady Catherine mocks him, thinking it sounds ridiculous. She also says that the zombies would have no use for a leader and cannot be ordered around. However, Collins disagrees, saying that the Book of Revelation says the Antichrist will lead the undead on the last day of mankind. Still, Wickham insists that they could form a treaty with the zombies before they overrun Britain, but Darcy is also opposed to the idea. When Wickham says that Darcy's late father would have supported his case, Darcy gets him kicked out. That night, Elizabeth can't sleep, so she goes out to the garden, only to come across Wickham. Suddenly, Wickham starts making a move on Elizabeth, but she's not interested in him in that way. So Wickham tells her that Darcy is the one who made the Bingleys leave because he thinks that Jane is only after Bingley's money. Furthermore, Wickham asks Elizabeth to run away together, but she refuses. Before leaving, he gives her one final warning to take heed of Collins' words about the impending doom. The next day, Darcy and Elizabeth confront each other. First, Darcy tells her that many people think Elizabeth is an inferior woman because of her financial circumstances. However, he follows this with a proposal, saying he has fallen for Elizabeth. Expectedly so, Elizabeth rejects him, but Darcy still asks how she could have refused his offer. So Elizabeth tells him that it's because he separated Jane and Bingley, a claim that Darcy doesn't deny. In fact, he even affirmed that he did everything he could to take Bingley away from Jane. Because of this, Elizabeth removes all attempts of being civil and starts attacking Darcy. She even takes a fire iron to use as a makeshift sword. While Elizabeth keeps attacking him, Darcy tries his best to apprehend her until it turns into a full-out spar. Furthermore, Elizabeth tells him about what Wickham said and reiterates that she will never want to marry someone like Darcy. When they get home, Elizabeth receives a letter from Darcy explaining the accusations she made. First, he says that he didn't mean to hurt Jane. He simply wanted to protect his friend Bingley from getting hurt as well. Secondly, he says that when Darcy's father promised inheritance to Wickham, Darcy's father immediately became mysteriously infected by the plague. Because of it, Darcy had been the one to kill his own father, who was turning into a zombie. However, Darcy still gave Wickham his promised inheritance, but the lieutenant simply squandered it. So Wickham keeps coming back to Darcy to ask for more money until he finally refuses. As if things couldn't get worse, Wickham apparently forced Darcy's 15-year-old sister to elope so he could get her inheritance money. But thankfully, Darcy was able to convince her to stop seeing him. Moreover, Darcy says he understands Elizabeth's feelings, knowing she will never love him. So, he sought solace in combat. He tells her that he's currently fighting in London, which has fallen under the attack of zombies. He theorizes that someone leads the zombies because the attacks were too calculated. Back at home, Jane tells Elizabeth that one of their sisters, Lydia, has been taken by Wickham. So Elizabeth immediately knows that they're probably in the church. At night, Elizabeth gets a visit from Lady Catherine. She asks whether Elizabeth will marry Darcy, but she can't give her a straight answer. Still, Lady Catherine says that Darcy shall be proposed to Anne. However, Elizabeth can't promise that she won't be engaged with Darcy. Because of this, Lady Catherine makes Elizabeth battle with her proxy, Wilhelm. Elizabeth doesn't concede to her, and she even manages to win against him. So Lady Catherine acknowledges her feat. At that moment, Mr. Bennet goes down to forbid Elizabeth from rescuing Lydia because it's too dangerous. So Jane says she'll go with her. However, Elizabeth doesn't want her to come because someone needs to watch over the family. Suddenly, Lady Catherine speaks up, telling Jane and Elizabeth to go while she takes the Bennets to her estate for protection. When they get to the bridge, the militia tells them they can't cross because the bridge is full of explosives. It turns out they plan to detonate the entire structure tomorrow at dawn to prevent the horde from invading England any further. Still, they push through. On the battlefield, Bingley is caught by a zombie near a detonating bomb, so Jane immediately comes to his rescue. Meanwhile, Darcy finds himself in the same predicament, saved by Elizabeth, who kills a zombie that's coming after him. Elizabeth tells Darcy that they came to look for Lydia, but Darcy tells her that the church was burned down 5 days ago. He gives his condolences, saying that Lydia couldn't have survived. However, Darcy was lying because he plans to save Lydia by himself to spare Elizabeth. Before leaving, he tells Bingley that even if he isn't back by dawn, they should proceed with detonating the bridge. When he arrives at the church, he immediately notices the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. After Darcy leaves, Elizabeth notices that Bingley is feeling anxious, so she realizes that Darcy is lying. Right away, Elizabeth rides to follow him. At the church, Darcy plans to sabotage Wickham's civilized zombies by giving them a taste of flesh, so he steals the brains of dead soldiers to tempt them. Furthermore, he sneaks inside to save Lydia. However, Wickham manages to catch Darcy, so Darcy tries to strike a bargain, asking for Lydia's freedom in exchange for money, but Wickham has no need for money anymore. Instead, Wickham asks for Darcy's watch that came from his father, but Darcy refuses, even when Wickham holds him at gunpoint. Wickham shoots, but the bullet hits the fence instead. Because of this, the zombie horde is alerted and immediately storms inside. Immediately, Darcy escapes with Lydia and leaves Wickham with the horde. It turns out Darcy's brain plan worked. Outside, Darcy gives Lydia his horse so she can go back to safety, but he stays behind to finish off Wickham. Wickham arrives, and they start dueling, with neither side wanting to lose. While Lydia is on her way back, Elizabeth is still on her way to Darcy. On the other hand, Jane and Bingley cross back to the bridge as dawn draws near. A soldier tells Bingley that it's time to detonate the bridge. Thankfully, Lydia arrives just in time. Still, Darcy and Wickham's duel is yet to be over. Even when Darcy manages to stab Wickham, he reveals that he's been undead all along, able to repress his urge for human brains because of his hatred for Darcy. He says that the 4 horsemen have risen from hell, and he is the Antichrist that will lead the undead. Before Wickham could kill Darcy, Elizabeth arrives just in time to save him, slashing away Wickham's arm before trampling him with her horse. Immediately, they ride back to safety. They make it to the bridge but can't cross it fully before the bridge starts detonating. Elizabeth survives the explosion and crawls to Darcy amongst the rubble. She cries, thinking he's dead, and confesses her love for him. Despite things dying down, the Bennets still stay at Lady Catherine's estate. There, Bingley arrives to request a private conversation with Jane. Then, Darcy arrives, all healed. A few seconds later, they hear that Jane has accepted Bingley's proposal, so they all run to congratulate her. Meanwhile, Darcy is left with Elizabeth. He thanks her for saving him and tells Elizabeth that he heard her confession at the bridge. He takes the opportunity to propose to her as well, so she agrees. Soon enough, Jane and Bingley get married alongside Elizabeth and Darcy, both officiated by Collins. But after the wedding, they see that a horde of zombies is ambushing them, led by Wickham.
Subscribe to watch more videos like this. Turn on notifications. And leave a like, it really helps the channel out. Thank you for watching.